Today is August 27th, 2024, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. All over social media, you'll notice a clip of an interview between a reporter from Meet the Press and J.D Vance. I forget the reporter's name. It's a woman, and she has a one-on-one interview with J.D Vance. It was done just the other day. It was a good interview, but at one point in the interview, J.D Vance fell into a logical trap and made a fool of himself. And this is the kind of thing that careless politicians do because they don't have a clear understanding of the art of reasoning. We can complain about Democrats all that we want. We can complain about leaders of our military, press secretaries, and so on, because they seem dishonest. They don't answer the questions, and so on. But the really great politicians, the really great communicators, avoid traps like the one that J.D Vance fell into. If you want to see the best examples, what I recommend is that you watch press conferences where representatives of the U.S. military speak to the press. If you want to see the best politicians, it's the representatives of the military who speak to the press. I recommend you go and find some examples on YouTube of press conferences between the representatives of the U.S. military and the reporters from the American press. What you'll notice about the representatives of the military is that they rarely answer any of the press's questions. Very rarely. We know what the press is trying to do. The press is not innocent. The press is not simply trying to gather facts. The press has very specific intentions, a very specific agenda, and their questions are often sophistical. They're often very cunning questions that, if answered, open up other issues. When these questions are asked, the representatives of the military always refuse to answer them. Now, what the nature of these questions is that they're hypothetical questions. They'll start with if. The reporter will ask, if this and this and this, what will the U.S. do? Or, if this situation were to arise, what would you do? They'll propose hypothetical situations and ask for a response from the military. Something like, if Iran attacks Israel, will America attack Iran? These conditional questions are hypothetical questions, and they're not appropriate for deliberation. They're not appropriate because the only way that a true decision can be made in any situation is by the consideration of every detail of the actual circumstances. So there's no way to answer a question like, if Iran does this, will the U.S. do this? That hypothetical situation oversimplifies the decision-making process and leads to an irresponsible answer. The representatives of the military are so well trained that they will never fall into these traps. That's why if you watch a press conference between these representatives of the military and the press, you'll get almost no information. You'll sit there wondering, what's the point of these press conferences? Because almost nothing is said by the representatives. Now, the representatives are there to share information, but the press is not there to gather information. The press is there to pry into other issues and try to get the military to reveal things that make for juicy articles from the reporters. When the reporters ask simple, factual questions, the military representatives answer them. But when the military representatives push back and refuse to answer, it's because they can discern that the questions being asked are not simple, factual questions. Now, when we look at the interview between the representative from Meet the Press and J.D. Vance, we find J.D. Vance doing exactly the opposite of what those military representatives do. And popular politicians, those running for office, do this sort of thing all the time because they're sloppy and careless. They're actually not the best politicians. They're easily baited into answering questions from the press. Donald Trump is the worst of all. And this is his biggest weakness in his campaigns, is that he has no self-control, no discipline when it comes to speaking with the press. We see J.D. Vance falling into this same trap, and I'll explain exactly what happens. J.D. Vance was presented with a question because the stance of the Trump campaign on abortion is controversial. It was very clear the first time around in 2016 and 2020. It was very clear that Trump was a pro-life candidate. Trump was a pro-life candidate who appointed pro-life justices to the Supreme Court. He was so effective as a pro-life candidate that Roe versus Wade was overturned as a result of Trump's appointment of justices. There has never been a pro-life president as effective as Donald Trump. Pro-life voters have succeeded many times between 1973 and today. They've succeeded many times putting supposedly pro-life candidates into office, and those candidates never did anything. Donald Trump was the only one who actually carried out his promises, put conservative justices on the court, and actually caused the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Now, many people think that Roe versus Wade is some sort of legalization of abortion law. They think Roe versus Wade is the cause of abortions. They think Roe versus Wade tells American people that they are free to get abortions, but that was never true. And so for all the hype, overturning Roe versus Wade has not brought about an end to abortion. It was never intended to do, it could never do so, because it was not a law that made abortion possible. The only thing that Roe versus Wade did was order that states cannot make abortion illegal. The Roe versus Wade decision made abortion legal in the United States, but it didn't make anyone actually get an abortion. It simply restricted the power of states to make abortion illegal. When Roe versus Wade was overturned, states were then made free to make abortion illegal if they wished to. So now in America, and this is what Donald Trump has explained 1,000 times, in America today, since Roe versus Wade has been overturned, every state has the power to make abortion illegal in the state. And we've seen some states do this. After the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we've seen some states make abortion illegal. We've seen some states make restrictions on abortion. And we've seen other states double down on keeping abortion legal in their states. And with Roe versus Wade out of the way, this is what states can do. States can make abortion illegal. And states, that is, the people at the state level, make that decision. Now that's a great breakthrough. If you're a pro-life American, that is a great breakthrough, because it allows American people who are opposed to abortion in states where they're the majority to make it illegal. That's democracy. That's how it works. But it doesn't make abortion illegal in America. Now, there are some who are not content with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. There are some pro-life voters who want the government, the federal government, to go further. They want the federal government to positively ban abortion in America. Now we have to ask whether such a position, politically speaking, realistically speaking, we have to ask whether such a position is possible, whether such a position is likely, considering the makeup of our country, the makeup of Congress, and so on. And when we think about this, it's very easy to see that Congress is not going to approve of any federal abortion ban. Congress is split almost 50-50. There's no way that a federal abortion ban would be approved by the existing Senate or House of Representatives. And so when the press asks J.D. Vance if a federal abortion ban were placed on the president's desk, would President Trump sign that into law, or would he veto it? This is a question that the military representatives would never answer, because it's a hypothetical question. It's an unlikely situation. It's an oversimplification of the problem. It's not a realistic question. It's not an appropriate question, and it should be resisted. When J.D. Vance was asked if Congress put a federal abortion ban on the president's desk, would he sign it or veto it? J.D. Vance should have said, "I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question like that." That should have been his answer. He should have said, the deliberation of laws or political actions depends entirely on all of the details of individual circumstances. It can only consider actual circumstances. It can never consider hypothetical circumstances, and therefore it's not appropriate to ask or answer hypothetical questions in politics. I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions, and he should repeat that every time the press asks a hypothetical question. As I said before, the military speakers and representatives who speak to the press, they're the masters at this careful communication. But most politicians are not disciplined, and they fall into these reporters' traps and say things that are then clipped and spread all over the internet, and Vance fell for it. So when J.D. Vance was asked if a federal abortion ban came to the president's desk, would he sign it or would he veto it? J.D. Vance stupidly said that President Trump would veto a federal abortion ban. That's the stupidest answer imaginable. In fact, J.D. Vance is saying if the American people wanted to ban abortion, President Trump would contradict the American people and refuse to allow abortion to be banned in America. How utterly stupid is that statement? Now, let's just think about this hypothetical situation. In order for a federal abortion ban to reach the desk of the president, it would have to already have passed through both houses of Congress. That means that the Senate and the House of Representatives, by some kind of miracle, would have both voted to support a federal abortion ban and banish abortion from America, to make it illegal in every state. Abortion would be made illegal, and this would be the will of the U.S. Congress. For that to happen, as I said, would be a miracle. America would have voted to make abortion illegal. And that would have come to the president's desk, pre-approved by both the Senate and the House. And we're to believe that President Trump would then veto that bill and not allow it to become law. That's ridiculous. Now the problem is that the situation is actually much more complicated. The reason why President Trump, in his current campaign, has taken the stance on abortion that he has is because the real circumstances in America are much more complicated than that. The majority of Americans do not want the federal government to ban abortion. The majority of Americans don't even necessarily want state governments to ban abortion. The majority of Americans think that government should really stay out of the abortion question, and that abortion should be left to women to decide upon in the consultation of their own advisors, whether they be physicians or pastors and so on. That's the general opinion of the American people. They really don't want the government deciding complicated, painful, personal questions about reproduction and abortion. And they call this freedom to make these decisions. They call them reproductive rights. And now, as a conservative, you can be opposed to that. You can say, no, abortion is never an option. It's never an option. And that's fine. I totally agree personally. But this is a political question, and the opinion of the American people is what it is. And so in politics, the question is not what is the ideal answer to a question, but what is an answer to a question that moves us toward the ideal as far as we can go, realistically. That's how a politician needs to answer a question. That's how a political candidate needs to answer a question. We need to acknowledge our ideal. Our ideal can be acknowledged. We can say we want abortion to be banned in America. That would be our ideal situation. Abortion should not be an option. No matter how difficult the circumstances may be, no matter how ugly the situation may be, killing a child should not be an option on the table. We can take that position. I personally would take that position. But when we come to the political table, knowing that most Americans do not agree with us on that position, the position that we should take, the question that we should ask is, how far towards that ideal can we get realistically? That's a responsible political position on the question. Not personal, but political. How close can we get to our ideal? And our goal should be to fulfill that objective. We should try to get as close as we can. So even if that means gaining just 1 inch this election cycle, we should be content with that inch. And next election cycle, we should try to get another inch and another inch and another inch. But the idea that we should lay the ideal on the table as the only acceptable option is the kind of stuff that belongs on social media among idle people. It's not a responsible political position. It's perfectly fine as a personal conviction, but it's not responsible in our present circumstances. It's not responsible as a political position. So, having overturned Roe versus Wade in 2024, running against an extremely liberal candidate in Kamala Harris, President Trump has taken a moderate position on abortion. Again, running against an extreme pro-abortion candidate, President Trump has taken a moderate position. And the goal of that moderate position is not to make abortion legal in America or promote abortion. It's to draw moderate voters away from Kamala Harris so that a pro-life candidate who has already proven himself to be pro-life can win the election and not allow an extreme pro-abortion candidate to win. That's a responsible political position. What the press was trying to do in asking J.D. Vance that question, if a federal abortion ban was placed upon the president's desk, would he veto it? The press was trying to divide Trump's voters. The press question was trying to divide Trump's voters between the extreme pro-life group and the moderate pro-life group. And we can see from the responses on social media that it worked perfectly. First of all, Vance fell into the trap and answered the question stupidly. Just a stupid answer, making President Trump to actually appear extreme in pro-choice opinions, which he's not. He's already proven that. He's already responsible for the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which is the greatest pro-life victory since Roe versus Wade in 1973. He's already proven himself the greatest pro-life president since 1973. The other presidents never did anything. And so when we come to the 2024 election, it's very clear that Trump is intentionally taking a moderate position to win the election. And anyone who is pro-life should want Donald Trump to win the election. He is the greatest pro-life president ever. And every pro-life American should be voting for Donald Trump. But what the press wanted to do was to divide his voters between the extreme idealists and the moderate, what I would call the politically responsible, from the politically unrealistic. And so the press asked this question: would the president actually act against Congress and veto an abortion ban, which is just a totally ridiculous hypothetical situation? The reason why President Trump has taken a middle position on abortion is, first of all, because Roe v. Wade is already overturned. The issue of abortion has been sent back to the states and should be fought at the state level today. And having already accomplished that, and knowing the current situation in America with respect to views on abortion, Trump chose to take a moderate position to win this election, which is responsible politically. But that's not to say that he is now a pro-choice president. If an abortion ban was placed on President Trump's desk, that would mean that the entire position of the Congress had changed, and that all of a sudden Congress was now interested in banning abortion. And as a president who has already proven himself a pro-life president, there is no question that President Trump would sign that into law and ban abortion. There's no question he would do that. The only reason he's even talking about respecting reproductive rights is because Roe versus Wade has been overturned at the federal level. And there is no interest in Congress for a federal ban. So that's just not a realistic scenario. And considering what the realistic scenario is, Trump has taken his position to win the election. His position is right and good for pro-life voters. Because priority number one is to win the election and not allow a pro-abortion extremist to win the election. That should be priority number one. Priority number one should be to not allow a pro-abortion extremist to win the election. Once the election is won, and that pro-abortion extremist is prevented from gaining access to the office, now the situation exists where we can work to promote pro-life values in real political circumstances. And that's what President Trump is attempting to do this election cycle. J.D. Vance just made a fool of himself by pretending that Trump's election position is his actual unconditional view of abortion and the question of banning abortion. J.D. Vance fell for this trap and made the totally stupid assertion that Trump would veto a federal abortion ban. And you see what Vance did, there's a number of errors that he made. But the first error he made, as I said, was even answering a stupid, ridiculous question. He fell for the press trap. And the second thing he did that was wrong was confusing Trump's election position for the sake of winning an election with his actual view on abortion. Because if Trump wins the election, and if Congress were to so change that they would become supportive of an abortion ban in America, Trump's election position would be irrelevant. He would actually have the support of Congress in banning abortion. And he's already proven himself opposed to the promotion of abortion. He is the president who overturned Roe versus Wade. And so, of course, President Trump would not veto an abortion ban from Congress. Vance simply fell for the trap and stupidly answered as if Trump's election position is his unconditional actual view of the question of abortion in America. And it was just a totally stupid answer. And what happened? Trump's voters went nuts. The extreme pro-life voters are now all over social media passing around this clip of J.D. Vance making this stupid statement that Trump is actually pro-choice now and would protect the rights of women to abort children, which is just totally false. He's already proven to not support abortion. And so now this clip of Vance answering this hypothetical question is being spread all over social media, and it has Trump voters, pro-life voters, arguing now that they're not voting for Trump because he has abandoned the pro-life cause. That was exactly the purpose of that question, and both Vance and these pro-life voters fell for it and are falling for it. Pretending to be some kind of pro-life champions, they're actually allowing themselves to be defeated by pro-abortion politicians and members of the press. They're actually allowing themselves to be defeated by being just so naive about how political questions work. And this was exactly the intention of the question. Vance fell for the trick, fell right into the trap, gave the exact answer that the press was hoping for. The press then cut up that clip, shot it into social media, and the pro-life voters, the extreme pro-life voters, are now pushing that clip all over social media, dividing the voters that were previously committed to Donald Trump, but have now been duped into questioning him by a radical, extreme pro-abortion press. That's how stupid they are. Both the politicians are stupid and the voters are stupid for constantly falling into these traps, so easily tricked by the press. Now, I know that the pro-life voters would do this. They're predictable. That's their problem. They're so predictable. They're so reckless and irresponsible politically that they would rather have Kamala Harris win the election so that they could protest Donald Trump on social media than think about which would be the better candidate of the two realistic candidates. And you see that this idea of political realism. We know it's a question of which of these two candidates will be president. There's no third option. There's no point in writing in another candidate. We're being asked to pick which of these two most nearly represents our ideals. And if you're a pro-life voter, there's obviously no question that Donald Trump represents more closely the pro-life position. So voting is a no-brainer. But these foolish pro-life idealists who are politically irresponsible will either withhold their vote from Trump or will spitefully vote for some third-party candidate or write in some random extremist who has no chance of winning. And the only effect of their political action will be to take votes away from President Trump, who's actually closer to their position, and help an extreme pro-abortion candidate to actually win the presidency. They will actually help the pro-abortion cause by this foolishness that they participate in as pro-life voters, because they're politically irresponsible. And this is a problem, especially for Christians. They have a very difficult time understanding their responsibilities politically. They act as if their vote is a question of what they believe, as if they're standing in church on a Sunday morning and being asked, what should the church teach? What should the church do? They speak about the federal government as if the government should operate with the Apostles' Creed as the Constitution, which is false. The secular government, especially in a democratic state like ours, is always going to be balanced. It's always going to be somewhere in the middle of the two extremes. That's what the checks and balances are for. The checks and balances are to allow a diverse society to live together and to have a government that's relatively stable. Somewhere a golden mean between the two extreme parts of the population. And when we look at the population, we can say the two extreme parts are the radical pro-life Americans and the radical pro-abortion Americans. They're the two extremes. Neither of them will ever be allowed to govern the state. The checks and balances established by the Constitution will prevent that. The actual position of the U.S. government will always be a moderate position. The question is, to which side will it lean? That's really the political question. Are we going to allow the government to lean to the left, or are we going to work to help the government lean to the right? It's our goal politically to see the government lean to the right. That's our goal. To have the government actually become an extreme pro-life institution is not even an option. And so any talk like that politically is irresponsible. It's always going to be balanced. We desire the government to lean to the right. That's it. And if we can get the government to lean to the right, then we can work to get it to lean a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And being content to take those compromising, incremental steps towards our ideals, that's responsible political action. But the extremism that we see from pro-life Christians especially, who imagine that they're showing themselves to be faithful Christians by spitefully helping the government to lean to the left, just shows the shallowness of their thinking. And this is the kind of thinking that got J.D. Vance into this situation in the first place, just stupidly falling for these traps that we know the press is setting, but having no discipline with respect to speech and answering the question in the exact way that the reporter was hoping he would answer it, so that the voter base could be divided and weakened. Vance fell for it, and the pro-life voters are now also falling for it. And this is the kind of thing that actually allows a more radical pro-abortion agenda to be carried out in America. The Christians and the conservatives are just politically stupid compared to the liberals. Liberals are very cunning politically. They're very astute when it comes to these things. And conservatives simply aren't. And they hand their opponents political victories by their stupid positions, where they try to show themselves to be faithful to the Christian cause and actually help the anti-Christian cause politically. So again, what Vance did wrong was answer a hypothetical question. The reason why answering a hypothetical question is wrong is because the question is about actual political action. And actual political action is always dependent on all of the details of the actual circumstances. So an actual political position can never be given responsibly in response to a hypothetical question. Whether Vance's answer was a good answer or not is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. That question should have never been answered by Vance. That question should have never been answered. In fact, every time he's asked a question, like anytime any politician is asked a hypothetical question, they should say, "I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions." Politics does not answer hypothetical questions. Legislators and presidents and justices in the American government do not answer hypothetical questions. They answer real questions in real circumstances. Again, Democrats are much more disciplined. For example, if you watch the woman, and again, I don't pay too much attention to politics, so I'm not good with names and details, but the black woman who represents President Biden, the press secretary, if you watch her press conferences, as a conservative, you'll find them frustrating because she never answers the questions. And you'll say, "What a jerk this lady is. She never answers the questions." That's because she's good at her job. That's because she understands politics. She understands the intentions of the reporters. She knows that their questions are not sincere, but they're tricks, they're traps, they're sophistical. They try to prod some information out of her that should not be shared, so that they can take that information and run with it and do something else. And the master press secretaries understand that, and they resist all of those questions. She's actually excellent at her job. If you watch the speakers that represent the military, you can watch an hour-long press conference and get almost zero information, because the press will ask hypothetical questions trying to prod some information out of these representatives of the military, and those speakers are so good at their job that they will never respond to those questions. And then you'll get some dopey conservative politician like J.D. Vance on an interview with a national television channel, national media outlet, asked one of these hypothetical questions, and he will just stupidly fall right into the pit answer the question ridiculously, and give the media the clip that it needs to now flood social media with. And then you can just watch every step of the process work itself out. You'll see the stupid, extremist, irresponsible pro-life voters take that clip meant to defeat their political candidate, and they themselves will promote it and push it all over social media and give the exact result that the press was seeking, while at the same time, and this is the wonder of it all, while imagining that they are showing themselves to be more pro-life than the candidate himself, when in fact they're actually helping their opponent by just falling for the bait every time. And I watch this happen and I say to myself, there's just no way to help conservative Americans. There's no way to help them because they are so practically stupid. Jesus said, "Be innocent as doves and shrewd as serpents." Jesus himself commanded us to be shrewd, and this modern Christianity is not real Christianity because, while it may be innocent, which is good, it's not shrewd. And Christ did not merely command innocence, he also commanded shrewdness. And this is where modern Christianity just falls apart. It's not shrewd. Christian people are not prudent enough to understand what's going on and make responsible decisions, take responsible actions. They're innocent like sheep, but they're also stupid like sheep. And Christians are not supposed to be stupid. We're supposed to imitate the innocence and gentleness of sheep. But we're supposed to also possess the shrewdness of a serpent. We're not taught this dopey idea that we should be both as innocent and stupid as sheep. That's a false idea of Christianity, and it's very common. It's very common in America. Christians will take an innocent position and then act totally stupidly with that position. And they actually cause the opponents of Christianity to win and gain influence, thinking themselves to be faithful to the Christian cause, when in fact they're disobeying Christ, who commanded them to be shrewd. Not just innocent, but shrewd. They're not shrewd. What frustrates Christians about anti-Christians is that most anti-Christians are shrewd, but they're not innocent. They're evil and shrewd, like the devil. We read in the book of Genesis, for example, that the serpent was the most cunning of all the animals in the garden. Evil people, for the most part, are both evil and shrewd. Christians are supposed to be innocent and shrewd, but they're not. They're innocent and dumb. And this is why they lose. Gimme elections. Easy elections. How can President Trump lose an election to Joe Biden? Watch. It's just a lack of shrewdness. A lack of shrewdness on the part of both the politicians and the voters. And in 2024, we look at this ridiculous election and we wonder, how could someone like Kamala Harris, a total political failure with no popular support, how can she possibly even compete with Donald Trump? And the answer will be that the politicians on the right side, the politicians on the Republican side, will destroy their own campaign by their lack of shrewdness. And the Christian voters on the right will give the victory to their opponents by their lack of shrewdness. That's how a Joe Biden ends up in the White House when he can barely speak. That's how a Kamala Harris, who is a total political failure, can end up being the president of the United States. The dumb Christians will give her the White House. And this is what they do. And it starts with stupid politicians falling for these traps, pretending that they're so clever, when in fact they're being fooled by these reporters and giving the media exactly the material it needs to divide the voter base and help the other side to win. So remember, when we talk about practical decisions, we never answer hypothetical questions, because practical decisions are only made in light of actual information in present circumstances. Practical decisions are never made based on hypothetical situations where we don't even have all the information. We should never, in a political discussion or any kind of practical discussion, we should never answer a hypothetical question. We should say, I'm not going to discuss hypothetical situations because it's irrational to do so. We'd be talking about a decision in a situation where we don't have all the information, and a good decision can never be made in such a way. And so no wise person would ever answer a question based on a hypothetical situation. So anyway, it's an example of the stupidity of conservative politicians and conservative voters that hopefully we can learn to avoid, so we don't continue giving elections to totally ridiculous candidates. I hope that's helpful. God bless.